Hi everybody, I'm Jennifer Tryon. Welcome to Beginner Free Motion Quilting. Before we get started, getting to the good stuff, we've got to crawl before we can walk or even run. And that means knowing what it takes to set up your machine for free motion quilting. Because no matter what machine you have, whether it's a big one with lots of throat space, or if it's an old machine you've had for years and it's a little traveler or a portable machine, don't sweat it. You can free motion quilt on whatever machine you have, and we're going to try to make it as easy for you as possible. There are a few steps though that you need to follow to set whatever machine you have up for free motion quilting. So there are some things that make life easier when you're free motion quilting, and then there are some essentials that you need no matter what. So let's start with the essentials first, and then I'll show you some things that'll make life a little bit easier. Optional things. The first thing you're going to make sure you have for supplies is a free motion quilting foot. Now, it could look like any one of these. This one here, often in your manual, will be labeled a darning foot. This is my favorite free motion quilting foot. That's the one I'm going to use today. Or it might look like this, a convertible free motion quilting foot, which allows you to put a couple of different types of feet onto your free motion quilting foot. Maybe your machine has this one or you've purchased it separately. Either way, you want to make sure you have a free motion quilting foot before you get started. The other thing that you need to have is a low tension bobbin casing. This is going to ensure that the tension on the bottom of your project is correct. And I've got a bunch of different ones here because there are different free motion bobbin holders for different machines. So make sure you reach out to us, let us know what machine you have, and then we can make sure you've got the right low tension bobbin casing. For some optional supplies that are going to make life easier, I'm going to suggest using your straight stitch needle plate. If your machine has one, this is perfect to use for free motion quilting. It has a much smaller hole where the needle comes down than your regular zigzag stitch plate. So that means if, heaven forbid, you get some sort of jam, there's not space for all of your fabric to get jammed down inside that big hole. So if you have a straight stitch needle plate, now is the time to use it. The other optional accessory that makes things a little bit easier, free motion quilting gloves. Sometimes it's hard to get a grip on your big project. The gloves really help. A little measuring gauge. Sometimes when you're free motion quilting, you want to keep your lines a certain distance apart. This little measuring gauge allows for all kinds of different measurements, all the way from 1/4 inch, all the way up to 1 3/8. So this is a great little handy tool that you can get right under your presser foot. And the thing that I like the most that really helps is a sliding mat. It helps move your project just a little smoother around your machine. The other thing that's really helpful if you have one is an extension table. If you have an extension table for your machine, this would be the time to expose the free arm and use your extension table. So now that you know what to use, let's get it installed on our machine. I'm going to show you step by step what to do. Did you hear that? That was me lowering the feed dogs on this big machine. You have to lower the feed dogs no matter what size machine you have. On this 6650 and on most higher end machines, you'll have a button like this at the side of your machine that allows you to raise and lower the feed dogs. So we want it lowered. If you've got a more portable machine, you'll probably find it at the back. These are usually stiff little buttons, and we're going to push it over just like that. And then what happens here is our feed dogs are actually going to fall, which means those teeth that normally pull the fabric through the machine are no longer activated. That means we're responsible for moving the fabric. That's free motion quilting. There's no extra help from the machine pulling the fabric through. Let me show you again. So when I feel my feed dogs here, they feel rough against my fingers. When I lower them, it'll go down. And then I can't feel those teeth at all. This is the mode you need to be in for free motion quilting. To return the feed dogs back up after you're finished free motion quilting, you press your button the opposite way and hand wheel towards you so that those teeth come on back up. But for now, we want those feed dogs to be down so that we can start free motion quilting. Now, if your machine doesn't have the ability to lower the feed dogs, then you may require a plate to cover up the feed dogs. Sometimes your machine will come with that. It's a little plastic plate that'll either clip onto your machine or screw onto your machine that covers the feed dogs so that you can get over top of them without those teeth pulling the fabric through. So you can check with us or your local dealer to find out if your machine can lower its feed dogs or if in fact you need to get a plate to cover the feed dogs. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change out my stitch plate and I'm going to install my low tension bobbin casing. I have one specifically for this model of machine. And since I'm going to be replacing my stitch plate anyway, I'm just going to pop it off. Yours might unscrew. And I'm going to take out my bobbin casing. This is a good time to clean in here while it's all open. Set your regular sewing bobbin casing aside. You'll notice on the inside, at least of this one, you can kind of see the lettering there if I catch the light. It says 13 grams. However, the low tension bobbin casing says 8 grams. It just puts a little less tension on the bottom thread so that when you're whipping around those corners in unconventional movements, that you don't end up with bad tension on the bottom side of your project, or something that sometimes looks like eyelashing, or little pieces of thread are sticking out away from your stitches, especially on the corners. If that's happening to you, you need a low tension bobbin casing. You can reach out to us, tell us the model of your machine, and we can get one for you. How you install it is you kind of let it fall into where the bobbin casing is, and you give it a little wriggle, and you want to make sure the two lines. You can see here the low tension bobbin casing has a blue line, and the regular bobbin casing, where can I show you this? The regular bobbin casing has a little red tick mark right there. And the low tension one here has a blue. And those lines are going to match up. That line's going to match up with the little tick on your machine. It should move a little bit. But it easily comes in and should sort of just wriggle into place. That's how you know it's in there. Then I'm going to go ahead and replace my regular casing with my straight stitch plate. If you don't have a straight stitch plate, don't worry about it. You can still free motion quilt. This is just a little bit of an extra guarantee. If something goes wrong, we're not going to get our fabric jammed down into our machine. So if you have a straight stitch plate, now is a great time to use it. So I'm going to install that in, or maybe you have to screw it on depending on your machine. So the bottom half, apart from putting our bobbin in, is ready to go. We also now up top need to install our free motion quilting foot. So there's a couple of different options I showed you. A convertible foot that looks like this, sort of this bigger metal contraption, and it will allow you to unscrew the bottom and replace it with a couple of different ones, like the glide foot, the open foot. It's convertible because it converts into a bunch of different feet. So that's a great one. The one that I like the most, though, is what's called the darning foot, and you can use this for free motion quilting. Looks like this on a lot of machines, at least a lot of Janome machines. If you have a different brand of machine, just check your manual and see what the free motion quilting foot looks like, and make sure that you install this onto your machine. Usually the free motion quilting foot means that you need to remove the regular foot and shank. So this is the ankle or the shank that's normally on here. So that's coming off. You don't need any of your regular feet for this. And you're going to go ahead and install right around your screw your free motion foot. It needs a bit more stability. That's why it has its own ankle on it. And make sure that you tighten it with your screwdriver, not just your finger. Because this is going to be going at such high speeds, like over and over and over, maybe for, an extended period of time, because you're going to get really good. Sometimes this has a tendency to wriggle itself loose. And if that happens, you could break your needle, and that's very scary. Don't worry, it usually doesn't break your machine or anything like that, but we don't want to break a needle. So every so often, or when you stop for a break, just make sure with your screwdriver, not just your finger, that is nice and tight, and then you won't have any of those accidents where suddenly this is wriggled loose and bam, your needle ends up hitting it, and it's a scary thing. Trust me. Okay, this is looking good. We're going to go ahead now that the straight stitch plate is on here and just make sure we've chosen a straight stitch on our machine. It's the regular stitch, the one when you turn on your machine. Probably the first one that comes on is just a straight stitch. That's the one you're using. Even though we're not going straight, it's not going to pull in straight. We just want it to do that up, down, regular motion, straight stitch. So that's what we're going to pick. So let's thread our machine like we normally would, wind a bobbin with the same thread on the top and the bottom. Now, some of you may have pre-wound bobbins like Deco Bob. I love that. No problem at all there. But when you're first starting something and you're trying to learn the tension of your machine, it's a good idea to start with the same thread on top as you have on the bottom. So I'm going to thread my machine and wind a bobbin, and I'll meet you back here. Another tip when you're first starting out is to choose the same weight thread on the bottom, but potentially in a different color. This way, if one of the threads is acting up, you know which one it is, the top or the bottom. So when I'm practicing here, I'm going to go ahead and just put this bright blue thread, same weight as my top thread, but just so I can make sure that it's not peeking through the top or my top thread isn't peeking through the bottom. Okay, our free motion foot is on. You should have a little scrap piece of quilt sandwich, which is just 2 pieces of quilting cotton. But before we get to actually sewing it, I want to point out that we're about to ask our brain to do something it has been wired to do differently our whole life. We're basically asking our brain to, instead of write our name with the pencil, which is what we're programmed to do, we're now asking our brain to write our name with the paper. Watch what I mean. It's very easy to take a sheet of paper and for me to write, okay, Jen, great. However, if I get my friend here or someone in your family to hold the piece of paper and now I try to write my name, it's much more difficult. See what I mean? However, you can get the hang of it. So this is a great way to practice. If you've got someone in your family that can hold a piece of paper and gently hold a pen, and you could start practicing moving the paper in loops, in a sort of meander, or just in a way that gets your brain a little used to moving and creating a design, even if it looks crazy messy like this. This is essentially what we're asking our brain to do. Now, we don't want our quilting to necessarily look like this. We want it to look a little more like we actually, but we'll get there, okay? We're going to get to that. So if you want to try to start with the paper and the pen, get someone at home to hold the pen and you can move the paper. The other thing you can also do that helps is legitimately try drawing some of the designs that you'd like to quilt. Maybe it's a meander. That's our first project, something that looks like puzzle pieces like this. Maybe it's swirls. Maybe it's feathers. Drawing can really help your brain get used to the size and the shape and the flow. So when you're doodling at a restaurant or you've got time to kill, get a little notebook and start doodling out quilt designs. It doesn't always mean you have to move the paper. Just get your brain thinking about, how can I flow? How can I move in a way that is going to help me create a design? Again, we don't have to start with feathers. We can just start with loops and practicing. Crawl before you walk, walk before you run type thing. All right, I'll set the paper aside. And we are going to practice on a little swatch of fabric before we get to any sort of big project. So again, I've got a couple pieces of quilting cotton and made a little quilt sandwich so that we can test our tension, make sure everything in our machine is working well, and that we can kind of get the hang of the movements before we bring our nice, good project fabric over to our machine. So on this piece of scrap sandwich, we're going to practice doing what we're going to do every single time. So I've got white thread on top. I've got that navy or royal blue on the bottom. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hang on to my top thread, and I'm going to press my needle up down button, or you could hand wheel if you don't have an up down button, but just make sure that bottom thread pops up. You want the bottom thread to be on the top. Again, you can achieve that by holding on to your top thread, press your needle up down button twice so it goes up and down, and you can give that a little tug or it'll pop right up. So you've got that bottom thread on the top. The reason why this is important is because if we left that bottom thread on the bottom, that could be your quilt back, and then you'd end up trampling over it. So this way, what we can do is put our presser foot down, still centered over top of where we've pulled those threads up, hang on to the threads and pull a long tail so you can hang on to them. It doesn't have to be super small. Pull a tail and give yourself a couple of stitches just in place. Make sure your presser foot is down. 1, 2, 3, 4, good enough. And now don't press the scissors here. Instead, lift your presser foot up and just trim those threads. Whether the needle is up or down doesn't really matter. Just trim those threads and keep your presser foot down. And now we're ready to start. So there's no little nest on the bottom and there's no nest on the top. You've got a couple stitches locked in place here. And now we can sort of start a path. Remember when we were drawing on our paper, we kind of, okay, where am I going to go? We need to come up with a sewing path here. And so it could be the kind of thing where you get a chalk pen or an erasable marker or even just a regular pen if you're just practicing. And you could actually go ahead and draw out some designs that you want to try to practice. But for right now, we want to just get the feeling of what free motion feels like. So it doesn't really matter if it's good or bad or jagged or what crosses over, no big deal. Let's just get used to moving the fabric instead, like the paper, instead of the pencil, the machine. Let's practice that. All right, you can either use the foot pedal or your stop-start button. And one thing before we get going, one more thing. We want to have fast stitches and slow hands. What that means is you can go ahead and turn your speed up on your machine, or if you don't have speed control, feel free to put your foot all the way down, pedal to the metal, so that your machine is stitching pretty quickly. We don't want slow stitches here. So if I quilt with my machine, with my speed way, way down, and I move my fabric even a little bit, we're going to have really big, long stitches. We don't want that. What we want is for our fabric to be at medium-high speed, like this, so that when we move our fabric, some nice even-sized stitches start to form. So what I'd like you to do here is just take your little piece of fabric and try to come up with a quilting plan. Am I going to go all the way to the side? Am I going to come and do some loop-de-loops maybe? I want you to get a feel for what gives you some even looking stitches. If you go really, really fast or really, really slow, what happens? And then I want you to try, hey, you could try writing your name. I want you to just fill this practice piece with the feel of the machine. Sometimes you're going to want to stop and reposition. Needle down helps there. Oh, I came unthreaded. So that can happen all the time too. So just rethread, no problem. You want to make sure, well, since I'm unthreaded here, we might as well take a look. So when I move really fast, look how long the stitches got. When I moved really slow, look how small the stitches got. And I could even start to see some of that blue bobbin thread coming up to the top. When I had nice even stitches like this at a nice even pace, I'm not seeing any blue coming through to the top. And all of the stitches are relatively the same size. So as you're practicing on this little quilt sandwich, I want you to notice some of the things that are happening when you're moving your paper instead of your pencil, and how you can kind of achieve a speed that feels good for those even stitches. Okay, take a little time. I want you to fill your fabric with all kinds of different stitches and then take a look at it. Take a look at both the top and the bottom. You want to make sure there's no eyelashing happening, meaning little pieces of fabric sticking out like this, looking like eyelashes. That would be an indicator that your tension was off. You want to take a look and make sure you're not getting too much top or bottom thread on the opposite side. It's looking good here, a little less good when I slowed right down. And just get a feel for how your machine feels when you're moving the paper, not the pencil. Let's take a look at some tension troubleshooting. So looking at the top of this little practice sheet, it looks okay. I've got like my, lines here, no problem. But if we turn it over, this is where everything is really revealed. So let's take a look at what we've got going on here. Right away, see this here? This is what we call eyelashing. This means there is not enough tension on the bobbin thread. So if you're getting little bits of eyelashing like this, turn up your top tension. You want to make sure it's at around a 4. If it's still doing this and it's at a 4, go up even more and see if you can correct that eyelashing. It happens especially on curves because you're kind of really pulling it. If you can't correct it by tightening your top tension, it means you need to have a low tension bobbin casing. Usually with a low tension bobbin casing, it will take care of that. But if you don't have a low tension bobbin casing, you can try hiking up your top tension to take care of that. So if we're looking at our stitch quality right here, if you're getting stitches that look small like this, it means you're moving your fabric too slowly. If you're getting stitches that look big and long like this, you're moving your fabric too quickly, or you need to turn up your speed. What we're aiming for is stitches that look sort of medium length and consistent. If you like the long stitch look, that's fine. Just make sure you're able to keep up that pace the whole time, because you're really going to have to move quickly to get long stitches like this. But ideally, we're sort of looking for a medium length stitch that flows along consistently. It's okay to have a few that are a little bit shorter or a little bit longer, but consistency is what we're going for. And definitely none of this on the back. We want to make sure when we're looking at our back stitching that you're not seeing any of that top thread, no matter how fast or slow you're going. That's how you know your top tension is doing well. Just like this, we're only seeing that top thread. Here, when I'm going a little too slow, you can kind of start to see that the bottom thread coming through. And this, again, we're moving a little too quickly. But our tension on the bottom looks great. Okay, keep filling up your fabric. Lots of issues come out when you test. So keep going until you've got this, and maybe you want to do another test sheet and another test sheet until you're really feeling like, yep, I got it. I'm ready to start. But I'll warn you, even with your test sheet, it's never going to be totally perfect, especially not right out of the gate. But as soon as you're feeling confident that you can get some consistent stitches, no matter what your pattern looks like, then you're probably ready to start your first project. So remember, just keep pulling up that bottom thread. Give yourself a few stitches. Snip away those extra tails. Press our foot down. And remember, we're just practicing here. So we could do loops. We could do hooks or swirls. These are all things that are going to come as the course progresses. Right now, I just want you to get the feel of what free motion quilting really feels like. You can fill that test sheet. And remember, it's progress over perfection. Right out of the gate, our designs are not going to look like the computer did it, and nor should they. Really, we're trying to have a bit of fun here, embrace where we're at, improve our skills, and get some of those quilt tops finished. Our first project in this class is going to be a meander on the table runner. So when you're feeling confident, we're going to give that first project a try. I'll see you in class 1.